Today I'd like to show you how to fit a NIStune Type 4 board to an S14 ECU. This particular one is an Australian delivered S14, part number 83F00, which comes with the SR20DET engine. Here's our NIStune Type 4 board, pre-programmed and ready to go. And when you unpack your board, you'll also find an adapter packed in with it. Most of the installation actually involves fitting the adapter to the ECU. Once that's done, the board pretty much plugs straight in. So on with the show. Remove your covers to start with. These often have Loctite on, so just be a little bit careful not to mess up your screw heads. Okay, so when we've got our covers off, we look inside. This is the area that we're going to be involved with. That's where the adapter will be fitted. We need to remove the conformal coating from that and then use our solder sucker to remove the solder from those pads. We also need to move this jumper here. It's a little 0 ohm jumper, just looks like a resistor, and that gets moved across to the next position, but more on that one later. On the other side of the ECU, you can see there's our pads. There's coating on this side as well that needs to be removed. To remove our conformal coating, all we need is some acetone or some paint thinners and a small bristle brush. I've got a little container of it and a little trusty mender container, which works really well. So just get your acetone and then you work that well into the area where you're going to be doing your desoldering. This one's got quite thick coating on it, so the idea is you mop it up with some absorbent towel and apply some more acetone. Usually takes a couple of applications before you get that properly clean, but it is worth persisting and getting it nice and clean and make the job much easier. That's not bad on that side, it'll be the same on the other side. Sometimes you can get lucky and they don't have the coating going all the way to the edge of the board, so these pins don't actually have coating on, but generally they do. That's not too bad on that side. Now the other place where you have to remove the coating is that jumper that we mentioned before. This one here on this particular ECU, its component designation is R21. It's got a bit on there, I might work it in with the brush a little bit. Because these are so small, the removal of the conformal coating is actually quite critical. You will have a lot of trouble moving this if you have any coating left on there. Okay, that's fine. Alright, next job is, once more, we get onto the other side. And I'm going to warm that up a little bit with the heat gun. Should be enough. Don't get too carried away. You should still be able to just touch that with your finger without it burning your finger too much like it just did mine. Alright, now we apply some flux onto that. You can see I have got that a bit hot because the flux is actually getting a little bit upset because of the heat. That's alright. On the other side, on that jumper that we're going to move, we'll be needing some flux on that as well, so while you've got your flux pen out, throw some on there. I might give that just a little bit more. I like lots of flux, makes the job easier. Now to desolder these pads, we need to just be aware that we need 2 rows of 20 and they're offset by 1 pad. So start at this one here and work your way along. These 2 on the end are ground, so sometimes you need to leave the desolderer on those a little bit longer, or apply a tiny bit of solder just to get a better heat bridge onto that. That comes out fine. And work your way along. The flux makes quite a bit of difference on these. If you've got the flux, you'll get a faster heat bridge between your desoldering tip and the pad. So you shouldn't have any issues with these ones here. Like most of the other installations, there'll always be ground pins and power pins. This one on the end here is one of the power pins, so you need to leave your iron on a little bit longer. If you've heated it up with the heat gun like I did before, that tends to help quite a bit. So they look quite good. You can see here that they are 2 staggered rows. So basically 1 extra on this row, and then on this end you leave this one. That one's not used. You'll see what I mean in a moment when we go to fit our adapter. Once you've desoldered those holes, just flip the ECU over and hold it up to the light, and you should be able to see light through every one of the holes. If you can't see light, then you'll need to remedy that before we continue. Now we're going to move our jumper across. It's a simple matter of, number 1, make sure your conformal coating is removed. Number 2, make sure there is flux on there, and then you go in, just use a reasonable sized chisel tip. Well, this is how I do it anyway. You need to make sure that you can get a solder bridge each end. So what I do is put a little bit of extra solder on there, and you can see that's worked because we need to do both ends of the resistor at once. Grab your tweezers, so then you go in with your soldering iron, get both ends melted, and you can just push him across onto the other pads like that. And with any luck, that should be it. Go back, so you'll often get little pesky peaks on these. I like to go back and just tidy them up. That one's okay. That's pretty good. Once you've soldered that jumper, get in there with your acetone once again and a cotton bud, give that a good clean up and just inspect the joints on each end. Make sure you've got enough solder on there, because if you have a dodgy joint either end of that can cause some horrible running problems, because this jumper tells the ECU whether to run in standard mode or whether to run off of the NIStune board. So I think you can see there these joints are reasonable. You can see there's reasonable solder on this end, reasonable solder on that end. If you don't have enough solder on there, if it just hasn't taken, put a little bit of flux on there and just touch it with your soldering iron and the joint will be just fine. Onto the fitting of our adapter. When you get the adapter, you'll see it has a small piece of paper over the end to protect the pins. So just remove your piece of paper, you'll see these pins. Now these are quite delicate. It pays to just have a good look at them, make sure they're all nicely lined up, because otherwise you will have trouble getting them in the holes. Bend one side up to get it out of the way while you deal with the other side, and then it's into the holes like so. You'll need something on the other side or a helper just to hold that while you solder it. Clean your soldering iron, and then the idea is we just solder one pin on this side. And then we can bend the other one down. Slip that in. Get him in place. So we'll solder one pin on that row as well, just to hold everything in place. You can see that's sitting up a little bit, but I'll deal with that in a moment. So get your solder on there. Don't hang around on there too long, or you will tend to melt the plastic of these ribbon cables. Once that's soldered, you can see it's sitting up. We want that to be sitting down nice and flush. So just grab your ribbon cable with one hand, reheat that joint, and in she goes. Now you can see which way I've got this adapter fitted. Basically it hangs over to the left. As long as you've got it that way, you'll be fine. All the details on the fitment of this are in the NIStune installation manuals anyway. Once you've got your adapter tacked in place, you can flip the ECU over, and I like to hang it off the side of the bench like so, and then we can solder the rest of the pins. So clean your soldering iron as per usual, and then we're into it. These two on the end, they're your ground pins. It's good to do those both at the same time, get some heat into it, like so, and then we can just work our way along. You can see I'm using quite a big tip, which works fine, allows you to get the heat in there fast. These are quite fine, so can be a little bit taxing. There's the one that we tacked from the other side. Sometimes they need a bit of a touch up. Don't put too much solder on. Ideally you want to be left with a nice convex fillet. Did I say convex? Concave. The one with less solder. Alright, you can see this is a ground pin, so you have this plane here, so there's a lot of copper there, so you'll need to stay on that a little bit longer. You could see how that took a little while before it actually wetted onto the pin. Right, next row. No power or ground pins on this row, so you can scoot along relatively quickly. Like a lot of the other installs, try not to stay on each pin just too long, because that ribbon cable on the other side, although it is a high temperature plastic, it is only plastic and you will melt it. It's not the end of the world, but it's not ideal. I'm using 0.5mm diameter solder for this. I wouldn't recommend you use anything thicker than that, because you will have trouble measuring the amount of solder you're applying. The 0.5 you end up using a reasonable length of solder, but it does work a lot better. Now it's time for, you guessed it, more cleaning up. You can see how much flux and gunk is left on there. So once again, out with your acetone. Clean them up nicely so we can have a good look at them and make sure there aren't any problems. Next we need to take a good look at our work. So just with an eyeglass and a good light, just go along and check each of the joints. What we're looking for is to make sure we haven't missed any, and also that there's no grime between them. That doesn't look too bad. There's a little bit of grime there that I might clean off, but generally they're pretty good. You don't want any solder blobs or slivers. That's all quite decent. Check your other side as well. Along here you can see that the solder has flowed through quite nicely and the plastic isn't burnt or singed. Okay, we're almost ready to fit our board now. You can see we have the adapter in place. We are going to be needing to put screws into these 4 holes here. Those ones there, you'll see those on the NIStune board. That's what mount it. Sometimes Mr. Nissan's people accidentally put some conformal coating in the thread, so it's worth checking that. In this case they have. You can just put some acetone in there and dissolve the coating. I do a fair few of these, so I've actually got an M3 tap that I run through just to keep the thread clean. Clean them up. If you happen to do it like I did and you do use a tap, just make sure you clean it up in the end. You don't want any swarf at all on your ECU. Alright, time for fitting of our board. Before you put the board in the ECU, just do a couple of checks. Number 1, should have the correct base image programmed for your ECU. 83F00 is the part number of our ECU. You want that to match. Also, if you have a look at that table, you can see they are the jumper settings to select the correct vehicle on this board. That covers most of the vehicles. There are a few that aren't on there. You'll find those in the NIStune install manual. If you look at the jumpers over the side here, you'll see that's our program jumper. That should not be fitted. And these ones here select which vehicle this is going to be going in. This is a S14, so you can see we've got jumper J2 fitted and everything else is off. You shouldn't have to worry about that. If you're the end user, it should come programmed correctly. Alright, we've got our threads nice and clean. Now it's simply a matter of plugging that in. Make sure they line up. There's 2 rows of pins, so it's easy to get those 1 row out. So just make sure that that's lined up and we're ready to roll. It fits in simply like that. Sometimes you'll find these daughter boards, you do have to bend them out of the way, or you may have components like this capacitor which foul on the adapter. Just carefully bend them out of the way and she'll go in just fine. So use your screws that were supplied with the board and bolt that in. Even I use a normal screwdriver on these instead of my drill. So just tighten those up nice and firm. And then it's time to put our lids back on. with this lid. There's a cutaway in one side which you match up with the blue connector. And we're done.